Okay, we're going to be doing a graphic organizer, taking some notes over section 3 of chapter 13 on the Middle Ages. You should have downloaded, if you don't have a copy already from school, if you've been absent, you should have downloaded the PDF file for the Middle Ages notes that looks just like this. If you haven't, you need to take a second, get that printed out so you can fill it in as we go. And this covers uh, time from 500 to 1500 AD in Europe, the transitional time between the end of the Roman Empire and the beginning of what we think of as modern Europe. Okay, in the circles, the center you see Christian church and society was a big part of the Middle Ages. And so we're going to discuss 4 key points here: the importance of the church, the Christian church and its involvement in politics, the church and art, and the church and daily life. And again, you just want to keep filling things in as you see them here, and certainly you can pause this at any time so you can stay caught up. The importance of the church in the Middle Ages. It tied people of Europe together. And because of this, the church gained influence with people. People relied on the church for just about everything in their lives. The church was heavily involved in politics. And when I say the church, I'm not talking about one individual building. I'm talking about the Christian, the Catholic Church as a whole. They gained political power. They were side by side with the kings and queens of Europe, and they helped them make decisions. They helped broker deals between different European countries. There was a lot of money, a lot of land going back and forth, passing hands. So the church and the politics were very much intertwined. The Pope actually started the Crusades. The Crusades were a war for the Holy Land, and the Pope is the head of the Catholic Church. He convinced the kings of Europe that if they would send their knights and soldiers to the Holy Land to fight the Muslims for control of the Holy Land, that they would be guaranteed a spot in heaven when they died. The church influenced the art of the Middle Ages. Most art at the time had a religious theme. Most paintings, most sculptures were religious in nature because the church was paying artists to do these things to put in their churches. Gothic architecture also came out of this time. It was a style of building churches and cathedrals, and that was greatly influenced by what the church wanted. In everyday life of the average person in the Middle Ages, their life centered around the local church. Many times the priest of the local church was the only person in the community who could read and write. So he kept all the records for the people: birth records, death records, records of marriages. People celebrated numerous holidays every year with the church. Okay, we'll move to life in the Middle Ages. And there's 3 sections here: the feudal system, the manor system, and towns and trade. Also, we'll be talking about changes in medieval society, political changes in England, the Black Death, and the fight for power. Okay, the feudal system was a system of exchanging land for military service. Basically, when a king had a section of land, he would break that section of land into pieces and give those pieces to nobles. Nobles were people that were rich, that had money and power. And he gave them that land in exchange for them promising to come to his defense in a time of need or in a time of war. And the system was made up with kings, nobles, and knights. So the king would parcel off his land and give it to nobles. Each noble would take the land he was given and parcel it off or break it into smaller pieces and give it to his knights. And then each knight on that land would have people called serfs, the poor people of the time, that lived on the land. They worked the farms. In exchange, they were given some food to eat, and they were given a small hut or a shelter to live in. Now, the manor system is a breakdown, a part of this feudal system. The manor was the large estate that was owned by the noble, this large piece of land. It was almost like a little mini town. It had a church, it had a blacksmith, it had a mill to take the grain and grind it into flour. There was farming areas. There was an area where the serfs, the poor people, lived. So peasants and serfs farmed this land. And a lot of people in these times never really went beyond the manor. They lived their whole life at the manor. They were born there, they died there, they never traveled anywhere else. Life in the Middle Ages was a lot rougher than it was in the Roman Empire. The people of the Roman Empire had made great advancements like we had talked about. And at the end of the Roman Empire, all that stuff was forgotten. the art, the music, literature, the mathematics and science, simple things like bathing every day, just didn't happen during the Middle Ages. Eventually, though, people started moving away from the country, and large cities began to develop, cities like Paris and London, which were originally small and dirty. But as trade increased, as the idea of trade, instead of just living off the land and making everything you needed, um, the idea of trade came along where people would take things that they had and trade it to someone else for something they wanted. As that increased, cities grew bigger and bigger in size because cities were where people went to trade things. Political change in Europe. One of the kings of England, King William, built a strong government in England, but he had total control. And in 1215, King John was forced by the nobles to sign something called the Magna Carta. And the Magna Carta was a very important document. It was one of the first documents that limited the rights of the king. It said the king couldn't do whatever he wanted whenever he wanted. He couldn't raise taxes, for example, whenever he wanted to. The nobles felt that the king was running amok, was out of control with power, and they told the king that if you don't sign this Magna Carta and agree to these terms, these rules, we're not going to support you anymore. And that was a very big risk for the nobles, because the king could have easily had them all killed by his soldiers or thrown into jail, but as it turns out, it worked. Also during the Middle Ages, a very tragic event happened. In the year 1347, a plague, a disease, a widespread disease called the Black Death swept through Europe. Over a 5-year period, 1/3 of Europe died. We'll go into a lot more detail on the Black Death in a couple of class periods, but the good thing that came out of the Black Death was Europe was getting very overpopulated. So after the Black Death, there was a lot less people, unfortunately, but that meant there was more food for everyone, more jobs for everybody, and the quality of life for the people that survived was much better. There was a huge struggle for power during the Middle Ages. There was 100 years war between England and France. They were always at odds with each other. And nation states started to rise around Europe. Prussia, France, Germany, Russia, all these nation states started to rise up, and people started to become much more nationalistic and care much more about the country that they were from.